Hello everyone and welcome to FiST Chat, the vodcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined again by fellow Apple enthusiast Steve Kern. How you doing there, Steve?
Hi there everyone in FiST Chat land. I'm doing well, and who wouldn't be happy today? It's our favourite topic. It's Apple with Steve Jobs.
Absolutely, and in case you're living under a rock or you're not interested in technology at all, Steve Jobs, CEO of Apple, has resigned. Probably, so it was kind of a long time coming given his current medical issues and whatnot. But we'll have a bit of a discussion about that. So, but don't forget our vodcast is available at www.fistchat.com. All our social media links are there, email, Facebook, Twitter. Interact with us. We're getting a bit of that recently, so that's quite good. We want to have those discussions with people.
Absolutely, always good to have.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, just want to clarify something that we talked about last week. It was in relation to HP's WebOS mobile operating system. They're not killing it, as it turns out, but they're in effect killing it because they're saying we're killing the hardware. But which means we don't want it running on any of our stuff. But everyone else is happy to have it. So I mean, you got to wonder about communication. I mean, you can see what they're saying. It's perfectly feasible for them to license the OS to other manufacturers and whatever. But the way they did it was, you might as well have killed it because it's like poison now. But
can I start a rumor? Maybe Google's going to switch from Android to the HP system.
Well, the other rumor, of course, too, is that Apple and Microsoft own most of the patents on Android, so they might have to switch the switch operating systems. Okay, so we'll go back to the topic at hand. Steve Jobs has resigned. So the question here is, will Apple still be what it is today going into the future? What do you think, Steve?
Well, seriously, it's a very sad day to see Steve Jobs go. I guess the reason I'm an Apple fan is because of what he's done at that company. He steered all the loyal fans, myself included. I might not be such a fanboy these days, but he steered us through the dark ages of PCs when people were buying PCs to do shopping lists and couldn't do much more with them. And let's be honest, the competitors with their Microsoft operating system weren't too flash.
Well, at the end of the day, he is really primarily responsible for the computers that we see today. I mean, he had his tech partner.
And the operating systems.
Yeah, and he had the tech partners that, I guess, created the stuff, but he was the one that had the vision to sell it to people. And not only just sell it to people, but sell it to it with style, which, there's always there's that famous interview he did where, he was asked, are you jealous of Microsoft's success? And he said, I got no problem with their success. My problem with them is that they make really third-rate products. So that kind of guy, I mean, the thing is, the reason why he's not, I guess, not associated with a company that owns the market in the sense that Microsoft did, because that's what Bill Gates, in effect, did. And we'll talk about him as well. But the reason why is that he wanted so much control over the platform that it, in effect, made it a boutique operation. And in many ways, it's kind of a good thing. They've got... there's kind of something to be said of having control over all the hardware, all the software, and making it all interconnect. Given their success and they were briefly the most valuable company in the world recently, beating Exxon Mobil or something, I think it was.
That's right. All that cash from all those iPads.
You can't really argue with it. But it should be interesting to see what happens from now. You would think in the short term, not much is going to change because I'm sure they would have had, whatever design plans in place. It's just a question of what happens maybe 5-10 years down the track.
Well, I think it's a real watershed because, the control that you talk about Steve Jobs exerting was because he always had the vision, and he made his first computers himself, and he wanted them to be useful. He he intuitively knew, if the man had a real talent, he intuitively knew how to make computing accessible for everyone. And he's done it again and again and again. He's done it with the Apple II.
Yeah.
He's done it with the Macintosh operating system. He's done it with the iPod, and he's done it with the iPad
and the iPhone.
The iPhone. I mean, this guy has made computing, or personal computing, or mobile, I don't know, communications, whatever you want to call them these days, more accessible to more people. And in this whole time of 30 years, no one in the opposition camps have ever come out with a product that's led the way like Apple has. And that is Steve Jobs' legacy. That's why there are so many Apple fans, and that's why it's a really sad day to see him go. Having said that, I think now we're seeing a generational change in terms of our computing, and even if he stayed, I don't think from this point on he could continue to make the great advances. Potentially he could, but I think he's led the path, sort of to a much higher plane.
Well, he certainly contributed enough. Even if he just contributed one of those devices, he would have contributed enough. But you mentioned too, I mean, it's quite amazing that there has to be someone else, that at least one other person out there that can figure this stuff out. But again, that's why he's such a visionary. And
but this is our question on FiST Chat all the time. Well, why can't someone else make something else that looks good and works?
Well, I think it's just that it seems like he's got that he had that consumer point of view in terms of, because there was a story about the Mobile Me. That was the pre-iCloud kind of cloud storage system, and it wasn't well reviewed. And apparently, in one of the meetings that he had with his top executives, he famously said, "What exactly does Mobile Me do?" And some poor executive got up and said, "This is what it does." And Steve Jobs said back to him, "Now, why the F doesn't it do that?" Well, this is reportedly what he said. So if you can imagine someone like that there, and and plus there's also that motivation that at the end of the day, you've got a whole team of people working on this thing. You're working on it hard, and then you got to send it up to a guy that's going to either go, "Yeah, I love it," or he's going to throw it against the wall and smash it because it doesn't work properly or the way it should. And maybe that's sort of something that's in the back of these people's minds when they're working on these things. And maybe, maybe the philosophy they need is what would Steve do in, this, when we're building this thing? Maybe that's how they're going to go about it.
Well, as you say, they probably have got plans for the future that have been mapped out and hopefully by Steve Jobs. I mean, one other thing we left out is that he got booted out of the company and then came back and saved them when they were on the brink of basically, obliteration.
Yeah.
They had a whole 4% of the market at this stage. I couldn't find anyone else with a Mac in those dire days of the mid-90s, but, he can turn that around. I think as we talk more in this episode about organisations losing their leaders, especially when they become very focused on a single leader, I can't see, even though Apple got very capable teams, of how they can continue. One, because it won't be one single person who can be a visionary like Steve Jobs, but two, because the whole landscape has changed. The thing about tablets is, even though the opposition are still struggling to make tablets that look good and work well, I reckon within a couple of years they'll all be able to do it. A bit like mobile phones. So, that's something where I think with the variety and the change in generational computing now, it'll be very hard to stand out in the future like Apple has.
Yeah, and just to wrap up on Steve Jobs before we move on quickly, is it'd probably be a little naive to suggest that Apple wouldn't survive without him. It's not necessarily that it will return to what happened when he got booted out. That they'll languish somehow. I think that they're going to continue to do very well. Okay, so just we'll have to move on quickly, but we'll talk about another one, Bill Gates. He's obviously left Microsoft, and the question is, has Microsoft, changed at all since since he left? And to be honest, despite Windows 7 being a very good operating system, fundamentally it's really not that different to Windows 95 or any of the others, which in itself is based on what the Macintosh platform. So, and at the moment they're really just running on products that they invented almost 15 years ago.
Well, look, far be it from me to pass comment on Bill Gates and his technical or his abilities. Obviously, been very good at marketing. As much as it's maligned, Windows has certainly improved over the years. I think the big change and the really interesting one, which I'd like your comment on, is since Gates has moved on from Microsoft, no one hates Microsoft anymore. So was it personal? Was it just people wanting to hate the evil empire? Like now, some people are coming out and saying that about Apple and Steve Jobs.
Well, I think that might have been, maybe it wasn't necessarily to do with Gates, only in the sense that Microsoft transitioned from being the market leader to a market sharer in that time as well. If you remember in the 90s, they were it, in terms of market domination. If they walked into the room and said, "We're killing this off," it would scare people. It would scare people. That doesn't.
Dead.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't happen, and that doesn't happen anymore because I guess maybe it is. Maybe that was what Gates pushed through. That was that kind of ruthlessness that he might have had, and that is no longer there on a day-to-day basis. But Microsoft is still a huge and successful company. They're just not exciting.
Yeah, and that might be really what we see, I guess, in an organisation like Google, for instance. The guys behind it, they're well known, but they're not seen in quite the same way, and certainly their companies don't seem to revolve, at least through the media or visually, as if it's all about them. Yep. So even though they're probably geniuses.
Yeah, exactly. And all right, well, it looks like we've only got time for one more, but we'll throw in a film one here, and this one I'm sure will engender a laugh by people, and that's what will happen to Star Wars when George Lucas moves on. Will it get better?
When he flies that X-wing off into the sky.
Yeah. Or he transforms into the Force or something. It's interesting because he's got that wrapped up nice and tight. So obviously his kids or whoever he's going to pass it on to will get it. Depends then whether they relinquish control over the thing, and whether whatever the copyright expiry thing is, whether in 50 or 100 years time someone tries to remake Star Wars or do something new on it because it's out of copyright.
Well, I wonder. Walt Disney's been dead for the better part of 40 years now, and he's still making movies. So who knows? In 50 years' time, as you say, will someone buy the license and try and do Star Wars Part 7, 8, and 9? Yeah,
well, they're cash cows, aren't they? And regardless of how they've turned out, particularly the most recent ones, lots of people want them. They want to watch them. So it's fascinating. But at the end of the day, it could be argued that, I don't know, that he did create the thing. So, it's got kind of his fingerprints on it. And if anyone else comes into it, it's obviously not going to be the same thing. And it's kind of, I guess, like with these other guys that we've been talking about, that it will continue, but it can't have that same flavor that it did when these guys were at the helm.
Absolutely not. In another 300 years, Star Wars will just be a documentary anyway.
Absolutely. With Jabba the Hutt or someone running around controlling things. Okay, we're running out of time, so I think that's all we can fit in at this stage. So thanks again for the chat, Steve.
Anytime. I hope we hear from some people out there with their ideas on what these particular icons of their industries mean.
And also any that we didn't mention, because we wanted to cover Murdoch as well and News Corp, but we couldn't get there. Maybe we'll leave that for another time when some news story about the phone hacking scandal comes to light.
When they close down Fox television in the US.
Yeah, exactly. So don't forget our website, www.fistchat.com. You can get all our links there. That's it for this week. So until next week when we'll be back, have a good week.